Sometime in 2025, FIFA's president stood in front of the world's press and made a promise. Not a hedged institutional assurance buried in a tournament briefing document. A direct, public statement. He said that everyone would be welcome at the 2026 FIFA World Cup in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. He said the process of getting visas would be smooth. Smooth. Because on a Saturday in early June, a man walked through the doors of Miami International Airport, carrying two documents that should have cleared him through any border on the planet. One was his FIFA appointment letter, certifying him as one of 52 elite referees selected by football's global governing body to officiate the biggest tournament in the sport's history. The other was a Somali diplomatic passport, the same class of travel document used by foreign ministers and senior heads of delegation. Omar Abdulkadir Artan did not make it through. He was pulled from the queue, subjected to additional screening, and eventually placed on a return flight home. By the time the opening whistle sounded in Mexico, the first Somali referee ever appointed to a World Cup was back in Mogadishu, and the word smooth sat in the international press like an accusation that needed answering. Start with who he actually is, because the details matter here. Artan is 34 years old, born in the Somali capital in 1992, and became a FIFA-listed referee in 2018. To understand what that means, you need to understand what Somalia's institutional landscape looked like in the decades that preceded it. Civil conflict had methodically dismantled nearly every public structure: hospitals, schools, courts, sporting federations. Building a career precise and consistent enough to earn recognition from football's global governing body, in that environment, isn't just an achievement. It's something closer to an act of defiance against what history said was possible. What followed his listing was a career of steady, measurable excellence. In January 2024, Artan became the first Somali referee to officiate at the Africa Cup of Nations, assigned a Group E match in Côte d'Ivoire during one of the most competitive continental tournaments in years. That wasn't a token appointment. The Confederation of African Football doesn't hand out AFCON assignments as gestures. By 2025, they named him their Men's Referee of the Year. FIFA then selected him as one of 3 center referees from Africa for the 2026 World Cup, and the only representative from sub-Saharan Africa officiating at the senior tournament. He was going to be the first Somali ever to referee a World Cup match in the 96-year history of the competition. Before he left home, he told the BBC what the selection meant to him, that reaching a World Cup had always been the ambition, that the moment of being chosen made every year of effort feel worthwhile, that it was, in his own words, a moment where everything came into focus. He arrived in Miami with his FIFA documentation and his diplomatic passport. U.S. Customs and Border Protection pulled him aside upon arrival for additional inspection. At the end of that process, they determined he was inadmissible. Their public statement cited vetting concerns. A Trump administration official, speaking anonymously to multiple major outlets, went further, alleging that Artan's denial was based on an association with what they described as suspected members of terror organizations. Artan and the Somali government have not accepted that framing. Somalia's former Prime Minister Hassan Ali Khayre said publicly that Artan had earned his place through talent, hard work, professionalism, and integrity. A Somali member of parliament, Ilham Gasser, put the most important question on the table directly. If these concerns were genuine and credible, she asked, why were they not identified when his visa was being processed? No satisfying answer has been provided. FIFA confirmed what had become inevitable. Omar Artan would not be part of the 2026 World Cup. FIFA's public response when it came was methodical and carefully worded. They confirmed the removal. They explained the tournament structure. All 140 match officials are required to be based at a centralized training and coordination hub located in Miami. This is not optional. If you cannot enter the United States, you cannot access the hub, and therefore cannot officiate. Not in Vancouver, not in Toronto, not in Guadalajara. The geography of the host cities doesn't change the entry requirement. They added that Artan would receive his full World Cup fee. So, payment and a closed door, delivered simultaneously. There is a version of this where the logic of the Miami hub rule defends itself. A tournament operating across 3 countries, spanning dozens of venues, require centralized logistics and shared preparation. The rule exists for a reason. But here is the version of events that cannot be defended with that logic. FIFA had known this rule existed since the day they decided the mandatory hub would be placed inside the United States. They had been operating during a period of significant, publicly documented changes to U.S. immigration policy. National football federations, journalists, and international observers had all raised the question, at various points in the lead-up, about what happened if an accredited tournament participant was denied U.S. entry. The public answer, embodied in that promise about smooth processes, was essentially, trust us. What they hadn't built was a verifiable contingency. What they hadn't secured was a guaranteed access framework for accredited tournament officials. What they hadn't done was pressure test what "everyone is welcome" actually translated to at an American immigration checkpoint. When Omar Artan arrived with every correct document and still could not get through, FIFA responded with an announcement and a payment. There was no emergency protocol. There was no alternative pathway. There was no structure in place to catch what had obviously been a foreseeable scenario. That's a specific institutional failure. It deserves to be named as one. The response from Canada arrived immediately, and without diplomatic hedging. British Columbia Premier David Eby, who oversees 7 World Cup matches in Vancouver, posted publicly that Artan would be welcomed and celebrated in his province. "Let's have him referee in Vancouver," he wrote. Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow, with 6 games in her city, including Canada's opening match against Bosnia and Herzegovina, called the denial plainly not right in a formal statement that made no attempt to soften the position. These weren't crafted diplomatic neutralities. They were declarations, a co-host nation drawing a clear, visible line between its own values and what had happened south of the border. But the move that genuinely shifted the story's center of gravity came from somewhere else entirely. On the same day the World Cup opened in Mexico, UEFA announced that Omar Artan would referee the 2026 UEFA Super Cup on August 12th in Salzburg, Austria, the annual clash between the Champions League and Europa League winners. This year that means Paris Saint-Germain against Aston Villa. UEFA President Alexander Seferin said football is made to connect people, and that the appointment was UEFA's way of showing its respect for Artan's ability. CAF President Dr. Patrice Motsepe said the appointment was a great honor for Artan and for African referees and a powerful example of football bringing people together across continents. Think about what this actually means. On the very day that the tournament built on a public promise of universal welcome began without him, European football, not an institution historically inclined to turn toward African football in moments of political inconvenience, delivered the loudest possible counter-statement. A Super Cup appointment isn't a consolation prize. It's a referendum on who really gets to be part of the world's game. And on that referendum, UEFA and CAF voted with unmistakable clarity while FIFA was still explaining its hub logistics. The Artan case is the story that captured global attention. It will not be the only one worth examining before this tournament concludes, because the structural problem runs through the entire arrangement. A World Cup co-hosted across 3 nations is only as open as the most restrictive border in the chain, and in 2026 that most restrictive border is making itself felt at every level. Iran's national team relocated their pre-tournament base camp from Tucson, Arizona to Tijuana, Mexico, over concerns about access and the security of their traveling delegation. The Democratic Republic of Congo navigated complications arising from U.S. travel measures linked to the Ebola situation in their region. Fans from Haiti, one of 12 countries subject to specific U.S. travel restrictions, were warned publicly by Canadian officials that a World Cup ticket does not automatically grant entry into Canada either. These aren't random misfortunes. They are variations on the same underlying architecture. A tournament sold to the world on a promise of universal inclusion, built on top of a geopolitical reality that was never fully reconciled with that promise. FIFA awarded the 2026 hosting rights in 2018. They had 8 years to build the guarantees, 8 years to negotiate firm, protected access for every accredited participant, 8 years to answer, with something concrete, the question of what happens when someone who should be at this tournament cannot get through the door. The question arrived. The structure that should have answered it wasn't there. Football has seen this collision between politics and the pitch before, and the historical record carries a lesson worth returning to. Go back to 1966, England's World Cup, held at the precise height of Cold War tension. North Korea was a country with which the United Kingdom maintained no diplomatic relations whatsoever. British officials required that the North Korean players compete under specific restrictions. No national anthem at the draw ceremony, no flag displayed in the standard fashion. The obstacles were real, and the political atmosphere around their presence was uncomfortable for everyone involved. And yet, the players came. They were housed in Middlesbrough, a northern English industrial city, where local supporters adopted them with a warmth that astonished observers across the country. North Korea beat Italy in one of the competition's most famous upsets, reached the quarterfinals, and produced one of the enduring human stories in World Cup history. A small, diplomatically unrecognized nation, handed a stage, and rising fully to the occasion. The point isn't to romanticize that era. It had its own profound injustices and its own blind spots. The point is that 60 years ago, in the middle of one of the most dangerous geopolitical confrontations of the 20th century, the people running international football found a way to get a team from a diplomatically unrecognized country safely across a border to play in their tournament. They decided it was important enough to make possible. They treated access as a value worth defending. In 2026, a referee carrying a diplomatic passport, with an unblemished record and a direct FIFA appointment letter, could not walk through an immigration checkpoint. Who really gets to be part of the world's game has a less certain answer now than it did when those North Korean players stepped onto the turf in Middlesbrough in the summer of 1966. Artan's personal trajectory in the immediate sense will likely be fine. He will go to Salzburg. He will referee the Super Cup. His name is now known across the footballing world in a way that no group stage assignment could have manufactured on its own. His career has a future, and a louder platform than it had 2 weeks ago. But what happens over the next 5 weeks, between now and the final on July 19th, is the question FIFA has to answer in real time. There are tens of thousands of accredited players, officials, support staff, and fans moving through U.S. entry points for the duration of this tournament. The system has already demonstrated that it cannot guarantee their access. What is the protocol if it happens again? What is the escalation path when the next official with the correct documents is placed on a return flight? Who inside FIFA has the authority and the direct line to intervene? The longer arc reaches past this summer. The 2030 World Cup is a multi-continental tournament spanning Spain, Portugal, Morocco, and South America. The 2034 edition goes to Saudi Arabia. Neither arrangement replicates the specific logistical problem of placing the mandatory officials hub inside the jurisdiction with the most significant entry restrictions. But the fundamental question doesn't dissolve when the geography changes. Is FIFA's relationship with its host nations substantial enough to actually protect the people it sends into those countries? Or is the guarantee just a public statement made in front of cameras, backed by nothing but the hope that nothing goes wrong? What this tournament has revealed in its very first days is the gap between the promise and the answer. FIFA still has time to close it. What it no longer has is any way to pretend the gap was never there. You followed this sport long enough to know the difference between bad luck and systemic failure. When the same tournament produces access problems for a national team's base camp, for fans from multiple sanctioned countries, and for a FIFA-appointed official with every correct credential in his hand, that isn't 3 separate misfortunes running on the same bad week. That is a pattern, and patterns tell you something precise about the institution producing them. Ask yourself this honestly. If FIFA can guarantee broadcast revenue down to the last decimal point, can guarantee that every commercial partner's logo appears in the correct frame at the correct moment, can guarantee that prize money reaches the finalists by the final whistle, why couldn't they guarantee that the man they appointed to blow the whistle could get through the door to the country where the hub is located? And ask yourself without flinching, who really gets to be part of the world's game? The tournament's marketing says the answer is everyone. The scene at Miami International Airport delivered a different answer. Both cannot be true at the same time. When Omar Artan landed in Mogadishu, government officials met him at the airport with flowers. Supporters draped the sky-blue Somali flag across his shoulders. They drove him to a stadium, not for any match FIFA had organized, not for any ceremony with a governing body's name on it, just to see him. Thousands of people filled the stands. They chanted. They lifted him onto their shoulders and carried him. No cards to show, no linesman to direct, no whistle in his pocket. Just a man from a country the world has spent decades looking past, raised up on the shoulders of his people, because he had come close enough to football's biggest stage to remind everyone watching that Somalia belongs in this conversation. That image didn't need a governing body's approval. It didn't require a press release or a ruling from a committee. It arrived carrying its own authority. And it will be there long after the July 19th final, as the thing this World Cup is first remembered for, before any of the goals.